Welcome back to Dante's The Divine Comedy 2019, Lecture 26, Lecture 9 on the Purgatorio. Day 3 concluded and Day 4 begun. Today we are going to see the 6th and 7th cornices of gluttony and lust, respectively. We will see Dante's dream of Leah and Rachel, the fire, and we will see the final words of Virgil today. So, I thought about starting with an interesting allegory, but I'm going to save that for later. Let's get straight to Terrace 6 because we have so much to get through today. Terrace 6 is the Terrace of the Gluttons. So, recall, Dante, Virgil, and Statius, and it is Dante, Virgil, and Statius, not just Dante and Virgil. At this point, rise up to the next terrace. Dante has one of his many P's removed from his head. He's down to 2 at this point in gluttony because there are 2 remaining terraces. And there we see 2 remarkable trees. In fact, first we see one and then we hear another, which is supposedly derived from the seed of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, from which Eve ate. And these trees, apparently, with these gluttons, excite desire in the spirits for food and drink and only frustrate the craving. Reminds me quite a bit of the punishment of Tantalus from the Odyssey, Book 11. He has food forever right above his reach, and when he reaches for it, it gets just beyond his grasp, and he has water just beneath his chin, and he's constantly thirsty, parched. Whenever he tries to drink, it recedes below him. And so these gluttons, these people that overindulged in the pleasure of eating and drinking during the course of their lives, are now made emaciated and starving with a constant desire for food. Wow. And so these souls here certainly expiate the sin of gluttony, while the trees, from the branches and the leaves, disembodied voices, again, poetry or song, sings out examples of, first, temperance. Remember the structure of Purgatory. Expiating virtue example in art, penitents themselves, and then the vice that the penitents have been, the penitents embodied in life comes third. So the 3 parts of each terrace are virtue art, penitence, and vice art, just to put it mundanely. In any case, we will then, after hearing the examples of temperance, hear examples of gluttony, and they are pretty famous. In any case, the first example of temperance is the first example in art of a virtue featuring the same person that is featured on all 7 terraces. That is Mary. And she says something that she said before to us. Vinum non habent. They have not wine. The same example as was used amongst the envious is used here. Sort of lack of creativity from Dante here. I suppose that could be dated or debated. In any case, the idea here is that these people do not have wine, and so they deal with not having wine in this case. The full story is not included, but the idea being that they have not wine and that is okay, and so that is how you use temperance in order to fight against your gluttonous desire. When you don't have something that you would like to have because it is very pleasant, then you accept that circumstance. And that's a much better way to be satisfied in life, because if you are constantly trying to fulfill your desires, you will never fulfill your desires because desire can never be fulfilled. Whereas if you learn to, say, be happy or satisfied with what you have, then of course your desires can be fulfilled because you aren't constantly working to fulfill them, which is a very interesting way of looking at things. In any case, we then get 3 more examples. The first example is one of Roman women. They were supposedly so well trained, so disciplined, that they could exist just by drinking water, according to Thomas Aquinas, a famous 13th century theologian. And so that's pretty incredible. Then we get a couple other examples. Golden Age humans who supposedly existed on nectar and ambrosia, just like the gods from the Greek and the Roman tradition, Greco-Roman, as it's often called. And then there's John the Baptist who fed on locusts. I don't know if you've ever seen a locust. It's a giant bug. It's like a giant, kind of pretty cockroach, but every 17 years they swarm in places like Nashville, and they'll cover the entire side of a building. It looks like a plague. I can see why those Egyptians back in Exodus thought that locusts were plagues. They do come like a plague. In any case, Gold Age humans, Roman women, John the Baptist did not need much food. They are good examples of temperance for those who had too much of a sweet tooth during life, the gluttons. All right. Within the branches of the second tree, a mysterious voice that identifies itself as an offshoot of a tree higher up whose fruit was eaten by Eve. That's obviously the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is within Eden, or terrestrial paradise, which we'll see Cantos 28 to 33. Well, this tree gives us 2 noteworthy episodes of gluttony or self-indulgence. These are obviously the more interesting. stories always. The sinful or vicious stories are always the interesting ones. Well, the first one comes from Ovid's Metamorphoses. So we see Ovid again up here, and the example is of the very famous marriage of the Lapis, or it is the story of the Lapis and the centaurs. So there are these Lapis. They were having a marriage, and they invited centaurs. Remember that centaurs, as we know from Nessus and Chiron, down amongst the violent in the Inferno, are half man on top, half animal on the bottom, just like they are in Harry Potter with Firenze and all of them. In any case, these centaurs are known to be rather bestial and not, and they cause violence or they cause trouble whenever they drink wine. Well, at a wedding, this wedding happened to have wine, unlike that Venum non habet one that Mary and Jesus was at, or were at. And so the centaurs get drunk and they try to abscond with the women. They try and steal all the women from the wedding, including the bride. Well, Medusa's head happened to be kept there, and it was used to turn them to stone after a large battle scene. And I actually highly encourage you, if you were interested in the Homeric and the Virgilian battle scenes from the Aeneid and the Iliad last year, definitely read Ovid's Metamorphoses. This battle scene is intense, and the descriptions of people losing teeth and heads and necks breaking are very descriptive. And so, if you're interested in that sort of thing, definitely watch it. All right, second example comes from the Old Testament. Sort of a weird example, sort of one of those odd, sort of archaic, far from us in our modern consciousness Old Testament examples. There's this guy Gideon. He was the commander of an army, and he was told that he needed to get his army down to size. He had something like 10,000 people and had to get it down to 300. And so the Lord, God, gave him a test, which was take your men down to the water, and those who make cups of their hands, you keep in the army. And those that just drink with their mouths to the water, well, them you get rid of. Interesting. In any case, I actually have that mentioned here. So, Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongue as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs, which sounds like it's bad, but isn't in this case. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. So they drink with their faces to the water, which is considered more like what an animal does, right? Like think of your cat, think of your dog. Does it cup the water or does it stick its snout into the water? And then think about you. Do you drink directly from a stream or do you use cups? The idea is that the more utensils you use to eat, the more civilized and less animal you are, which is why some people cut their pizza, not me. In any case, all the rest got down on their knees to drink. He, the Lord, said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapped, I will save you, and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. The idea is that those who actually cupped, they did not give into their passion quite as much as the ones who just stuck their heads down into the water. These are the examples of gluttony. So those men who gave into gluttony did not get to fight for their Lord, did not get that great glory. They were kept from the glory in the same way that the people who did not follow Moses quickly amongst the slothful were kept from glory. Apparently these vices keep you from things you really want, or rewards of much greater value than the temporary, small, superficial rewards that you grant yourself, I suppose daily. In any case, Dante here meets two poets amongst the gluttonous. They are Forese Donati, who is a relative of his wife, as well as Bonagiunta da Luca. Remember that da means of. It's just like von or van from German or Danish. And so, Forese is from the Donati family. Something interesting about the Donati family is that we find representatives of it in each canticle of the Divine Comedy. Forese, obviously here we find in the Purgatorio. His sister, Picarda, will meet in Canto 3 of the Paradiso. She'll be amongst the faithful, blemished by inconstancy. She'll actually be with somebody named Constance, ironically enough. And his brother, Corso, will actually be taken down to hell. He's not yet dead at this moment, but he will be taken down to the Inferno after he does die. In any case, let's talk about Forese specifically. He was a childhood friend of Dante, and as I said, he was a relative of Dante's wife, Gemma Donati. Now, something he and Dante were known to have done with each other is exchanged insulting sonnets called tensone with each other. And in fact, these tensone are very crude, and I'm going to show you 6 of them. Basic attribute of them is that, and I don't know if I have it listed here. Well, yeah, I'll say it in a second, but I'll say it now too, is that you would take up the theme of one poem and then use that as the theme of the next one. You would insult, say, you'll see Dante insults the wife of Parisi, saying that she's cold in bed, and then Parisi will say, oh, well, I needed some extra money, so I went to the I went to the burial mound, not the burial mound, cemetery, and there I found your father digging up a grave in order to find extra wealth. And so you can see it's like, your wife is so, your dad is so. It's sort of like the yo mama jokes that you might have told when you were young. Yo mama's so poor that you live in a box, or something like that. You live in a box, or the bathroom is the next corner on the left, or something like that. In any case, that's the sort of crude, vulgar, youthful joke that they would make with each other. And we all sort of smile because probably you know that you have made such vulgar and crude jokes with other young people before and taken pleasure from them. And yet, now Dante and Parisi, rather than laughing about it, they sort of feel weighed down by it. They sort of are embarrassed by their behavior. Dante is showing that just as those in Purgatory transform morally and become morally more upright, so is he becoming more morally upright at this point. In any case, something about Parisi, when he first appears to Dante, something about these gluttons is they're not rather large and corpulent as you might expect them to be. They are emaciated, skinny. Their faces are ravaged and tiny. In fact, or not tiny, but withered within like a withered fruit. The idea being here that they are now starving in the same way that they glutted themselves while they were alive. So starved is Parisi that you can't even, that Dante doesn't even recognize him when he first sees him. In fact, he thinks that his face looks like a big M, like this. This is where it comes from. If you look at the face of a person and you inscribe the two arches of an M above the eyes, it does look like there's an M there. Well, when you add in the eyes, it looks like it's saying the word omo. Omo is the Italian word, the medieval Italian word for uomo in Italian, which comes from the Latin word homo, like homo sapiens, which means the same, or means man. Homo in Greek means the same. And so, we are homo sapiens, wise man. The idea being that, what's the cause of all vice and sin in the world? Man, of course. And yet, man is revealing himself for what he truly is through his temperance in this case. He is showing what he is without excess, and not that much. All right, last thing interesting about Parisi. He's all the way up on terrace 6 of 7 within 5 years of dying. Statius took him about 1,200 years to fully expiate himself of sin. This guy's almost done with it after 5 years. How? Well, apparently his wife, Nella, who's full of every virtue, very like Penelope, prays for him so much that she has shot him up the mountain. So I suppose the idea here, also like with Penelope, is marry the right person. They'll help you out quite a bit. All right. Notice this. Again, the M made by the cavernous nature of the faces. Notice that the eyes make it an O-M-O, omo, like homo, like uomo, all mean man. And medieval Italian, and of course Latin, all very closely related. In any case, as I was saying about the Tensone, Dante mentions that they must both feel weighed down now. I was talking about his moral transformation as he exerts himself going up the mountain. Rather than sitting and joking around and saying, oh man, those jokes we made were so funny with each other, he says, that was a time in my life I'm not particularly proud of because my character has become more upright. And so he says these crude and these vulgar jokes, I'm sure they still kind of weigh us down. So, the Tensone, I describe them very quickly as sort of rap battles. This is a more technical definition. A literary dispute in which two writers show off by alternately insulting one another. And this was a popular medieval genre. Remember, genre is type of literature. An early precursor of the verbal dueling heard today in rap dissing. In fact, I could give you an actual example. I think they're called epic rap battles of history. Are good modern examples of this. A personal favorite of mine is Gandalf versus Dumbledore. Gandalf versus Dumbledore. I think Gandalf actually says, Dumbledore, you're just a ripoff of me. And it's like, well, yeah, true. In any case, the combatants usually take a word or an image from the previous poem and use it as a hook upon which to hang a new theme. I'll show you this on the next slide. And we find 6 sonnets here exchanged between Dante and Parisi. These are the following lowlights. Lowlights as in opposition to highlights, of course. course, because this is vulgar or crude. All right, Dante says he feels sorry for Pharisie's coughing wife. Her cough, her cold, and I'll leave it to your imagination what's being insulted here. And all her other fears are not because she is advanced in years, but only for some lack inside her nest. The morning after a coughing fit, so you can see the coughing picked up here. Pharisee expects to find pearls and gold coins in the graveyard, but instead comes upon an Alighieri, Dante's father. So he's saying your father's so greedy that he digs up graves of people, that he commits sacrilege in order to do it. Dante then picks up on the not motif in order to underscore Pharisie's dissolute ways. It doesn't actually say not here, which can be confusing. And mind you, even if you stopped your gluttony, so Pharisee is directly here called gluttonous, it's now too late to pay back what you owe. I'm not going to keep reading all of these, but you will have them sent to you in the slides. These are the Tinsoni. This is the sort of thing that young people say to each other. Think back to your own lunch yesterday. Did anybody make fun of somebody else and did you laugh? The answer is hopefully. In any case, the second poem, or second poet that we meet is Bonagiunta da Lucca. He is from the Tuscan city of Lucca, as you would expect, because he is da Lucca, from Lucca. He played an important role, though not the preeminent role, in the development of Italian lyric poetry. Obviously, Italian lyric poetry is very dear to Dante's heart, because in a work before the Divine Comedy, the Vita Nova, he included several sonnets and pieces of lyric poetry. Before one becomes an epic poet, writing a 14,000-line epic poem after having been exiled, one has to practice. So just like Virgil wrote the Eclogues and the Georgics before the Aeneid, so did Dante write the Vita Nuova, before, which is a prose philosophical work, before writing the Divine Comedy. In any case, Italian lyric poetry itself took influences from the poetry of Provençal troubadours, the Provençal troubadour poetry. Troubadours are people like Homer, like rhapsodes, people who walked around singing, traveling minstrels. In any case, we will meet the preeminent traveling minstrel from Provence, the Provençal man, Arnaud Daniel, right before we see Virgil disappear today. We've got a lot of poets to meet. Guido Guinizelli as well. In any case, something interesting about that troubadour poetry is it was first developed in the court of Frederick II, the same Frederick II who was amongst the heretics, not amongst the violent, as I had erroneously been saying when we discussed Manfred back early in the Purgatorio. In any case, three things important about Bonagiunta here. Two people he mentions, the notary, Giacomo da Lentini, and Guitone, he mentions did not have the same ability as Dante. In fact, these were all people that Dante considered lesser poets than he. The second big thing he does is he gives a name to Dante's style of lyric poetry. The dolce stil nuovo. The sweet style new. The sweet new style. He is the one that gives name to it. And so apparently Dante is so famous that even the dead know of him. Just as Statius is recognized in the dead by Virgil, or rather vice versa, Virgil is recognized by Statius, so here is Dante recognized by one of the dead, Bonagiunta. He is being treated with great respect in this moment. And then the last thing you need to know about Bonagiunta, 3 of 3, is that he actually quotes a line from Dante's Vita Nuova back to him, showing that he has read Dante, that Dante is becoming an author of some preeminence, that not only is he transforming in terms of becoming more upright and less vulgar and more sophisticated, but his reputation is even transforming. He is becoming a bigger name, a more household name, a quotable name. And the line, of course, is ladies who have understanding of love. And so you would expect multiple of those words to be involved in some sort of sweet love poetry, especially if it's called the Dolce Stil Nuovo. Ladies, obviously going to be a big part of it, and also love. Understanding, too, very interesting, showing his sort of understanding of the Odyssey, though he didn't get to read it. That is, of course, what Antinous describes Penelope as being, or what Antinous describes Penelope as having better than any other woman ever to have existed during the Greek times. She has great understanding. She's very smart. Just very similar to Arete as well as books 6 and 7 of the Odyssey. So, last thing Bonagiunta mentions. He says this word gentuca. Gentuca seems to be a reference to a woman who will take Dante in during his exile. So what this reveals to us is a question that was asked earlier. Can the souls on the Purgatorio see the future like the souls in the Inferno can see the future? Do they have access to hyperopia? Well, if she is prophesying here about the future of Dante, or rather if Bonagiunta is prophesying here about a woman taking Dante in during his exile? The answer is obviously yes. Now, something interesting about the criticism of Guitone, remember he's the one that's not the notary that was talked about by Bonagiunta, is that his art, his poetry is too artificial. Didn't sound right, didn't sound natural, and too highly stylized. Was obviously had a lot of work into it, wasn't synthesized well. Well, this reminds you a little bit of candy, which is itself highly stylized in terms of the packaging and also generally the shape and also obviously the color. Almost every part of candy, almost always, unless there's some fruit in it, is totally artificial. Well, that's showing you why these poets are here. Not only was Parisi actually directly called gluttonous by Dante, but the idea behind someone who's gluttonous is they have too much of a sweet tooth. And well, what's the problem with these poets? Well, they were too sweet. They liked artificial conventions too much, like someone who likes too much candy. As if the idea is that if you just spend your time reading fluff, vulgar literature or just romance literature of not high quality, it's as good for your mind as candy is for your stomach. Which is, I think, a powerful, powerful claim. In any case, we must now ascend to the final terrace of the Purgatorio. We must now venture towards the lustful. Cantos 25 to 27. Quite a bit will happen here. We have two final poets, me, Guido Guinizelli, and Arnaud Daniel. I'll do my best to speak in some Provence for you, or Provençal for you, which is a derivative of French. I'll do an okay job. You'll hear it a little bit. You'll probably have some criticisms and some notes. We'll also see here the final purgatorial fire that Dante must pass through. We'll see Virgil encourage him, and then we will see Virgil's last words, and then we got to go. All right. Up on the terrace of lust. First things we're going to talk about are the examples first of chastity, where we will see Mary, of course, mentioned first, and then the examples of lust. The first come, Canto 25, 127 to 132. The second, 26, 42, 42. So, yes, and before I even mention that is, what is happening on this terrace? So just as the gluttons beneath two trees are constantly afflicted with terrible hunger and thirst and are so emaciated from starving, from fasting, I suppose, since it's willingly imposed on them, so are these souls encased in fire. So as Dante walks up the terrace, on the right is the edge, as he's going up to the right. On the left is the cliff face, and on that cliff face there are flames raging out from it, in which sinners are dancing in pain, essentially. So that is what Dante will see here. From that raging fire, we hear the penitents themselves giving these examples of chastity. And the first one comes from Mary. And she says, Virum non cognosco. Man, not I know. I know not a man. That's a reference to the fact that she had a child by being divinely impregnated, which means that she did not suffer lust before having her child. She has a virgin birth, a parthenogenesis, which is what it's called, which is why she's sometimes called the Virgin Mary, because though she had a child, she knew not man, and she knew not the lust that accompanies often the act which produces a child. Similarly to that, we have, again, an example from Ovid's Metamorphoses of Diana, who is herself a virgin goddess, like Mary, had a cult of virgin, Parthenoi, or Parthenai in this case, where her nymph Callisto is actually raped by Jupiter. Again, if she's raped by a god, she obviously did not want this to happen. She did not herself experience lust. And she does become pregnant, and she is kicked out of the cult callously by Diana because she is no longer a Parthenos. So these two women are women who became pregnant and had children, but did not have the accompanying lust that one might claim that one who chose to copulate and have a child would have felt, which I think these are powerful examples. Now, the examples of lust, far more powerful, far more interesting. Always the vicious examples are the most interesting ones. That's why they say if you're going to go to a college and you have the chance between reading the official guidebook to the college and the unofficial one, can you guess which one most people would choose to read?
Unofficial.
Unofficial, because it's going to include all the things you're not supposed to know. In any case, examples of lust. Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah seems to be the name of one city. I've tried to look this up before. I'm like, is it Sodom and Gomorrah? I think it's Sodom and Gomorrah. In any case, there are spirits here split into two divisions amongst the lustful. Those that were homosexual and those that were heterosexual. This here is the example of those who were deviant and what Dante would call the homosexual way. And so these biblical cities, I guess they are described by cities, were destroyed by fire and brimstone for the transgressions of their inhabitants, including sinful sexual relations between men. Here, I'll even show you the story. And there came 2 angels to Sodom at eventide. And Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. And Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And Lot says, Ooh, no, you don't want to do that here. And he pressed upon them greatly. And they turned in unto him, and entered into his house, and he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. Sounds like good zinnia from Lot, which is actually how I interpret this story, not how Dante does. But I'll tell you that in a moment. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round. That means they surrounded them. Both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. That know there is very famous from the KJV. Know means know in the biblical sense. It means that they want to lay with these 2 angels. They want to take them out into the streets and ill-use them, you might say. Now, I think that's not the point of this story. I think the point of this story is about the zinnia and how the zinnia gets trespassed. Oh, yes, because of what's done by those men in that city. The city gets burned to the ground the next day, and Lot and his wife get to go on and survive. But so, I think that story is about what happens to a city when it gives up on justice and no longer upholds the zinnia. But Dante thinks that that's what happens when you attempt to abduct men and engage in something unspeakable, I suppose you might say. Something unspeakable. In any case, the second example, I would say far more unspeakable in some ways than the first example, though the first one was pretty negative, and that makes sense at the top of the Purgatorio. In any case, this is the example of Pasiphae and the Minotaur. Now, well, this is a very famous story. Hera became very angry at Pasiphae, and she gave her a very unnatural lust for a white bull. So she thought a white bull looked very handsome and wanted to lay with him. She then went to the great inventor Daedalus, who invented later on the labyrinth for her son from the white bull, called the Minotaur, and Daedalus created for her an effigy in the form of a bull. She then got into that effigy. She then was mated to the bull in secret. She then became pregnant, and then she had the Minotaur. Her secret did not stay secret for very long. King Minos in shame created the labyrinth, put the Minotaur in there, and for his son, his natural son, who died in a war against Athens, he had a 7-person tariff every year from Athens. So he would have to send 7 young people to the labyrinth that would then be killed and eaten by the Minotaur until the great hero Theseus showed up and killed that Minotaur with the help of Ariadne and her golden thread. In any case, the idea here is that it destroyed her life, this terrible sexual union, in the same way that lust destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Give into these vices, even whether they seem small, they have tremendous costs. It's like when you start pulling one thread out from a rug, you might end up pulling the whole rug apart itself. And so these are the examples. Let's get to the last 2 guys we need to talk about today before we leave Virgil behind us forever. The 2 poets that we meet now are Guido Guinizelli and Arno Daniel. As you would expect, they are love poets. And remember, while we're talking about the lustful here, being back among the lustful in Inferno 5, remember who was there? Francesca herself was something of a love poet, speaking with all her language of love. And herself read love poetry, the poetry of Lancelot and Gawain, and Lancelot and in particular Guinevere. And so, Guido Guinizelli. Notice also here that he is in Canto 26, just as Arno Daniel is. Recall what I said in Inferno 26. In the Canto 26 in the Divine Comedy, whether it be in the Inferno, the Purgatorio, or the Paradiso, is the canto of poetry and language. And so, in that first canto, the first 26 in Inferno, we saw Ulysses, and he was encased in flame, just like Arno Daniel and Guido Guinizelli are encased here in flame. We also did not get to hear Ulysses directly because he speaks Greek, and Dante and us don't speak ancient Greek. Well, Arno Daniel here speaks in his original language of Provençal. I will show you the language. It remains untranslated in Dante's The Divine Comedy. It is translated for you in your translation, but in the actual manuscripts of the Divine Comedy, the language changes from Italian to this French dialect of Provençal. It is the only time that a character gets to speak in his native language if it happens not to be Italian. It is tremendous respect by Dante, though something funny about this is the lines that are spoken in Provençal are not lines from the work of Arnaud Daniel. They are lines written by Dante, which I think is wonderful. In the same way that almost all of Virgil's lines are written by Dante. In any case. Yes, good. Guido Guinizelli. Who was he in particular? Well, he was the founding father of lyric poetry. So do not get him confused with Forese Donati, who was helpful in founding. This guy is the founder. And Dante sought to emulate and perfect this style with his Dolce Stil Nuovo. Well, he was inspired by an ennobling conception of love, quite the opposite from a vulgarizing conception of love that makes you more bestial or animal. Such poetry, in Dante's view, was characterized by a beautiful, harmonious style, worthy of its subject matter. Love is supposed to be the highest concept, the highest virtue. It should have the most beautiful language. It should have the most ennobling effect, not the most pornographic or negative effect. It should not simply focus on that which is sensual or physical. It should focus on that which is metaphysical or theological, that which is eternal, that which is actually beautiful about love, not that which is shared within animals. That was the idea of Guido, and that is what Dante liked about Guido. Well, Guido's reputation was already noted by a penitent on the Terrace of Pride, back in the first terrace, and he appears here on the seventh and final terrace of Purgatory, purging himself of lust, with in flames shooting across the mountain pathway. So, Arnaud Daniel. He is himself singled out by Guido Guinizelli, showing that he's no longer super proud, as the better craftsman of the mother tongue. He says, hey, I was a great poet, and I was the founder of the Italian lyric poetry, but there is yet another person who is a better poet of his mother tongue. Though I speak Italian, you speak Italian, Tuscan, this man speaks a derivative of French Provençal. And so, something interesting about him is that line, better craftsman of the mother tongue, which is obviously written by Dante, not by Guido Guinizelli or Arnaud Daniel, though they're featured here, was a line used 6 centuries later, 20th century, by 20th century, the 1900s, by T.S. Eliot, who's a very famous poet who I hope you read senior year, as an epigraph to his The Wasteland, which is his most famous poem, to honor a man named Ezra Pound, who was an excellent poet, helped to get Ulysses, first published by James Joyce, but unfortunately joined the Italians during the World Wars and became a fascist. In any case, in Dante's poem, this better vernacular poet is, as I've been saying, Arnaud Daniel, a Provençal poet from the 12th and 13th centuries, so just a little bit before Dante was around, just before he was born. So, Arnaud Daniel himself. He is praised by Dante for his love poetry, and known also for his technical virtuosity. He was a very technical poet. He dotted his I's, crossed his T's very well. In fact, he invented a type of poetry called the sestina. You can see that word for 6 in there, in which the same 6 rhyme words are used in each stanza according to a precise formula. Obviously, Dante cares about this very much with his terza rima, as well as his very, let's see, what am I trying to say? And also the inclusion of his tercets. He is obviously a very technical and tightly wound poet, or tightly put together poet. In any case, Arnaud's high poetic standing is reflected in the Purgatorio not only through the courtly content of his words. He says some very courtly things. He sounds like a very refined person. He is being refined by these flames of lust that he finds himself in. But this is, as I've said repeatedly at this point, the only instance in which in the entire Divine Comedy, in which a non-Italian character speaks in his mother tongue. Obviously, all the Italian ones get to speak in Italian because the work is written in Italian. And so, here it is. I'm going to do my best to read this to you. Imagine that this is somebody that's doing their best who's not an expert at French. And so the first line is actually in Italian. El comincio liberamente al dire. And then this is what what Arnaud has to say. Tan mobile vos cot demain que ne pues ne voir à vos cabreurs. Yo suis Arnaud, que pleure à vos contents, que siro, vers la passada polar, et vers je sens la joie qu'espère de l'eau. Ero vos prec, per quel valor, que vos guida, el son de scalina, sovina vos temps, deme, or dema dolor. That last word of pain. And something interesting just to notice in these lines is that Dante keeps the terza rima going. Notice demon, conton, danon, and valor, valor, dolor, And dira, cabrera, and the word in the line above dira is actually also rhymes with dira. And so it's very interesting. Dante is allowing him to speak in his native tongue while writing himself in a tongue that is not native to him and putting a structure onto the words of Arnaud that he gives to them rather than what are natural to him. And so it's like he is taking Arnaud into himself and expressing what he has learned from him in his own poetry. In any case, we have two final things to discuss today. The final dream of Dante, the third and final dream, and the exit of Virgil, and we have about 4 minutes to do it. So, Dante's third and final dream on the Mountain of Purgatory is as clear and tranquil as the first dreams were fraught with violence and sexual angst. Notice, the first, and which makes perfect sense now that he is about to get out of the terraces of Purgatory where you cleanse vice and sin and into celestial paradise. He is going from a place of storm winds into a place of calm. And so recall the first two dreams. Ganymede's abduction. Remember, he was abducted by Zeus or Jupiter's eagle because he was beautiful. So there is an element of not romance, but sexuality there. And then recall also the second dream, the siren. Well, the siren is deeply sensual and leads sailors to their doom because of their beauty, the beauty of their song and the beauty of their figure. In any case, the siren also represents the three sins at the top of Purgatory, one of which is, of course, lust, another gluttony. These are the carnal sins, also avarice and prodigality. And so now, rather than having a violent and sort of vicious dream, we now have a very pleasant dream. And so what do we see? What do we see? You don't need to write that. After witnessing all these painful purgations, we now get to see a scene of pastoral calm, as in like in a pasture land, grass, like imagine Little House on the Prairie. And so, who do we see here? We see two characters, one named Leah, one named Rachel. Leah is moving her hands, making a garland. Rachel is looking in a mirror. And so, moving her hands. Leah represents what is called the active life, whereas Rachel, who is reflecting, literally looking at her reflection, represents a second sort of life, the reflective sort of life. These two characters come from a story in the Old Testament about Jacob. Jacob wanted to marry Rachel, and so he worked 7 years to marry her. But at the end of those 7 years, he was told by the man who was the father of Rachel, "Oh, I said you could marry my daughter, and my daughter is Leah. So if you want Rachel, you have to work a whole another 7 years." The idea being that you have to put in the work before you can reflect, or that the good life involves not only work or practical affairs, but also contemplation and reflection. Not one, not the other, both together. In any case, Leah was the first wife of Jacob and bore him 7 children, while her younger sister Rachel, his second wife, died while giving birth to their second child. And notice that 9, there, that holy 9. In any case, something important here is that in the Convivio, this is another work written by Dante. Remember that he had 4 works: Monarchia, Convivio, La Vita Nuova, and also the Divine Comedy. He intended to have 15 works, but he didn't finish. He agrees with Aristotle that a life of contemplation, of thinking, is better than a life of action, but here he seems to move away from that and suggests that in order to live a good life, you can't just have one or the other, just as I said. You need to have the appropriate mix of both, like Jacob marrying both of these women. In any case, I have it here. You don't need necessarily to write this because you have written this. Leah represents the active life. Rachel represents the contemplative life. Leah represents activity because she's actually engaged in an activity, gathering flowers, like someone who is a gardener. Notice that garden imagery. And then pasture. And then Rachel never stops looking in the mirror, like someone who is constantly reflecting. Jacob marrying both is a symbol for the good life being a balance of active and reflective life. And of course, that's what you have to do on the Purgatorio. During the day, you suffer in penitence. During the night, you get to reflect on things, often having dreams. All right, this comes from the Convivio. We must know, however, that we may have 2 kinds of happiness in this life according to 2 different paths. Skipping a little, one is the active life, the other the contemplative life. And the best happiness and state of bliss comes from, and although by the active, as has been said, we may arrive at a happiness that is good, the other leads us to the best happiness and state of bliss, as the philosopher proves in the 10th book of the Ethics. So, contemplative life was best to Dante during the Convivio. He seems to have changed his mind. All right. Now we have 1 minute to say the final things that Virgil says. So first he gets Dante through a fire, reminds him of Beatrice. He says, "My son, though there may be suffering here, there is no death. Remember, if I guided you to safety even upon the back of Geryon, Then now, closer to God, what shall I do? And even if the bell rings, listen, there are only 2 slides left. When he saw me still halting obstinate, he said, somewhat perplexed, now see, son, this wall stands between you and your Beatrice. Dante has to get through this final fire. So Virgil encourages Dante. Virgil reminds Dante that there is no death to fear. And Virgil reminds Dante of his motivation to see Beatrice again. And now, here are the final lines of Virgil. My son, you've seen the temporary fire and the eternal fire. The temporary, purgatory, eternal, inferno. You have reached the place past which my powers cannot see. I've brought you here through intellect and art. From now on, let your pleasure be your guide. You're past the steep and past the narrow paths. Look at the sun that shines upon your brow. Look at the grasses, flowers, and the shrubs born here spontaneously and of the earth. Among them, these are the last lines, you can rest or walk until the coming of the glad and lovely eyes, Beatrice. Those eyes that weeping sent me to your side, await no further word or sign from me. Your will is free, erect, and whole. To act against that will would be to err. Therefore, I crown and mitre you over yourself. Good work, students. Virgil is gone.